if I have a thought, I have to pass it on. Isn't that what faculty is supposed to do? They just pass on whatever they're thinking of. So let's go to the video. And can you start that, Alicia? I hope you enjoy this.
I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and you. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. I see skies of blue, clouds of white, bright, blessed days, dark, sacred night. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. The colours of a rainbow, so pretty in the sky, also on the faces of people going by. I see friends shaking hands, saying, how do you do? They're really saying, I love you. I hear babies cry. I watch them grow. They'll learn much more than I'll ever know. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Quite simply wonderful.
Isn't that fun? You know, just an amazing video. So I always gotta at least see it once a year, certainly at Earth Day. So Alicia will be transferring us over to the Earth Day slides here, if she can get off from this, which I had my own problems with getting off from this before. It doesn't want to go away once you've got it up. So I want to tell you a little bit about One Health. For certainly all of the students in here, they've probably been bombarded with my discussion of One Health over the years. And so One Health is essentially a philosophy that was really recognizing that humans, the environment, and living creatures like animals and plants are all connected. I take this even further and kind of go from the point of view, it's much easier, I think. We've got one planet, and we're all on the same planet with the environment and with all of these organisms. We are all dependent on that planet being healthy. If it's not healthy, ultimately we're going to pay the price. Recognizing that, which is kind of our goal with One Health at Del Val, is to get this across to all majors. Not just students who are going on to veterinary medicine or wildlife kinds of degrees, or who are going to do human health, but everyone. Isn't it important that a business major understands how their business might impact the society as well as the environment? The same is true for every major. We'd like to produce students who are going to go on to be good global citizens. And I think the group that's with us tonight are good examples of good global citizens who are looking to work at the community level to improve their community and for the betterment not only of the community, the county, the state, the globe. And so here at Del Val, we've done a few things with, whoops. Well, I'm not even going to go any further. Well, you can shut that down. I'm going to turn this over now To Dennis Livrone, One Health has been around since 2015, fall of 2015, and I think Dennis has been with us pretty darn close to the beginning, and has been an adjunct here at Del Val, at Temple, now is a councilman for the Doylestown Township Borough, and again, giving back, giving back, giving back. I'm going to turn this over to him. Just before I do, just think about this. How many of you planning on going to A-Day? A-Day weekend. So if you are, please stop by Feldman 114. We'll have a One Health exhibit there called Dig It, which is a Smithsonian exhibit about how important soils are to us. So again, not recognizing just everybody above the soil, but what's going on beneath as well.
Why don't you give that mic to Dave, and he'll use it for the question and answer. Okay, can you hear me? Yes. Thanks, Reg, for that introduction and the video. What I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce the panelists, and as I introduce them, I don't like that sound. That's because I was pressing the wrong button. As I introduce them, they're going to come up and sit on the stage in their assigned seats. Yeah, can you hear me now? How about now? Okay. So first we have James Lannon. James is the chairman of our Doylestown Borough Planning Commission, and he's also the chairman of our Parks and Recreation Board. So he's doing double duty volunteer work for the borough. Obviously a long-time Doylestown resident. He grew up in, a part of his growing up years was in the borough. Then we're gonna, next up on the stage, coming up on the stage is Grant Alger. Grant is the chair of our Environmental Advisory Council, and I'll tell you more about his involvement in a minute. Next is Karen Highland. Karen is our Doylestown Borough Director of Planning and Zoning, and she was instrumental in moving the planning process through the borough review, approval, and adoption process. Next is Grant Rowe. Grant is our fairly recently hired sustainability coordinator for the borough, the first one that we have had in the borough. And we are leading the way in Doylestown Borough with many things, including hiring a sustainability coordinator such as Grant. And then we have Mike Rodig. Mike is the executive director of the Bucks County Planning Commission, very recently appointed to that position, so congratulations on that, Mike. All right. So I wanted to thank the panelists for agreeing to be here tonight and share what we've done in preparing this Doylestown Climate Action Plan. We call it the DCAP. So you'll hear us saying DCAP rather than the whole title throughout the presentation. So just a couple other thanks that I wanted to do for about another 20 minutes or so. I want to thank I'm going to read it because that way it won't, less chance of messing up. I want to thank the borough's 10-member Environmental Advisory Council, which Grant Alger chairs, and in particular, the DCAP Task Force, which was comprised of the EAC members of Steve Nelson, who is in the audience with us tonight. Steve? Dave Rydell, is Dave here? Patricia West, is PR here? No. And we had 3 community volunteers, Rochelle Turchin, Mike Feingold, and Colleen Tibbs. Are any of you here tonight? Okay. Well, these were the people that sat in countless meetings. You have an estimate of the number of meetings, Steve, that we had? A lot, too many, right? That debated these things back and forth about what should be in, how should it be presented, what are our priorities, and you'll hear more about that in the presentation. And of course, I want to thank any and all borough staff, starting with Karen, that had a part in producing the decap. So could you pass that on to other staff that aren't here tonight? Sure. And then lastly, on the thank yous, here at Del Valle, I wanted to thank Professor Reg Hoyt for always honchoing the One Health Working Group, which he mentioned that I've sat on that working group since the beginning. And on a side note, Reg pointed out to me just this afternoon that this is his last One Health seminar. After 12 years of starting and running a successful One Health program here at Del Valle, he is retiring at the end of this semester. So let's hear a big round of applause. And so I did some math, and 12 years of doing it ended up being 22 semesters, not 24, because one was in the spring, wasn't. So that's 22 semesters of One Health seminars like this, times 6 sessions per semester. I think that's 132 is my math on that, of these seminars. So great work, Reg. We're going to miss you, but I know you're going to be turning it over to the very capable Professor Alicia Shenko, who's running the IT now for us up there, and Claire Drolet. She's a librarian, right? Claire's the librarian, chief librarian. So they're going to take over running as co-chairs the One Health Working Group. So it's going to, Reg is saying, two very competent individuals. So we'll look forward to One Health continuing, and watch for announcements for future programs. I know in the time that I spent on the One Health Planning Committee, we've got people at these seminars to speak at these seminars you never know how many people you're going to get, so we've had this auditorium packed, and we've had less people at different things, and of course, we did it on Zoom for a year. But we've had people from literally all over the world, people that are specialized in some aspect of One Health, whether it be plants, animals, and anything related to the topics that Reg talked about that One Health covers. As a matter of fact, this topic is a little bit different from some of the more hardcore science topics that we've had. Yes. Yeah, that's good. We've had climate change at least once a year, presentations at least once a year. And so when Reg was doing his summary of One Health and talking about, One Health is a global thing, but it also starts at the local level. I think everybody's heard the expression, think globally but act locally. And that's my segue into introducing the panelists here to get started on telling you about the Doylestown Borough Climate Action Plan. Oh, you know what? I forgot to mention that a lot of the grunt work, the crunching the numbers for our plan, for our decap, was done by a Penn State student, Joe Thompson. We got a hold of Joe through the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, who has a relationship with Penn State students. I think they also maybe work with Drexel students, but they can set these students up with local municipalities to do just what Joe did for us in helping us crunch the numbers and get the hard work done there. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to Karen Hyland. Now, there's a mic there, Karen. I would suggest that maybe as you're speaking as a panelist, you might want to just stand up over here so you can see what you're talking about, right? Unless you have it completely
I think I'm okay. Is this good?
Or not, yeah. Karen, it's all yours.
Thank you, Dennis, and thanks, Del Valle, for having us and allowing us to share our plan. I'm going to keep my portion of this as short as possible because it's really just to set the stage for how we got to where we are. Pennsylvania's Act 247 is known as the Municipalities Planning Code, and it allows for and defines what a comprehensive plan should be. A comprehensive plan is not an enforceable plan, It's just meant to give some guidance on the direction that's should be taken on how we want to shape any given town or any given county. In this case, it's just the borough of Doylestown, obviously. There are basic elements that should be included in a comprehensive plan, although it is exactly as its name suggests, comprehensive. Overall, I'd say it's a land planning document, and what that does is it's got to include these elements of future development, location, character, and timing of it. It's required to include residential, industrial, commercial, and various land uses, agricultural, parks, public facilities, utilities, et cetera. It's required to evaluate housing supply and demand. It's required to include transportation planning. It's required to include community facilities like education and hospitals, recreation, emergency services, and the needs of the community. It's meant to be a roadmap for implementation on how all of these suggestions will play out. It's required to evaluate, as One Health suggests, how do all of these goals interact with one another, and how do they perhaps compete with one another. And finally, as a requirement requires addressing the protection of natural resources, and that's what leads us to this local climate action planning, or LCAP, or as we've called ours, the DCAP. And that's it. I'm going to hand it over to Mike from there.
Thanks, Karen. So when the Bucks County Planning Commission contracted with Doylestown Borough on their new comprehensive plan, we were the main consultant on that plan. We proposed to them what's called an implementable style comprehensive plan. So Karen had just talked about the various plan elements that go into a traditional comprehensive plan. And what we found over the years is that this style of plan tends to, you tend to end up with a very large document because there's a lot of things to cover. Through the process, you take all those elements, you put them into chapters, the Planning Commission reviews those chapters. And at the end of that process, you end up with a large document where the priorities of the plan aren't really that clear. So this is really not satisfactory to really anyone. So really throughout the state, a lot of municipalities are moving to what's called this implementable style comprehensive plan. And through an implementable style plan, we ask the community, what are your priorities? What is important to you in terms of what do you want the borough to be, 10, 15 years into the future? And we do this through careful consultation with the Planning Commission. We send out surveys to the community. We conduct workshops. We conduct public meetings to really get an understanding from the community what the priorities are. And so once we understand what those priorities are, we divide those into themes or focus areas. And so with the DB 2035 comprehensive plan, you'll find that instead of chapters that are headed by comprehensive plan elements, they're headed by these broad themes that are important to the community. So for example, sustainability is not a required element of the MPC, but it is something that's really important to Doylestown Borough. And so what we're able to do is structure that plan around those things that are most important. We're able to create a document that instead of being 150 pages, maybe it's only 75 pages, it's full of priorities that are clear to anybody who picks up the plan and reads it. It's an accessible document. It's got pictures, it's got graphs. It's intended to be something that the public understands and can get on board with the ideas that are in that plan. So Karen had also talked about the various elements that are in the plan that are required. Anything that we don't include, we can just backfill into an appendix, and we can point out various activities and documents that the Doylestown Borough already has that can make up or that can speak to those other required elements of the implementable style comprehensive plan. And so one of the other things that is really important to implementable style comprehensive planning is the fact that it's an ongoing process. It doesn't stop with an adopted document, it continues. And I think that, through the next couple slides that you're going to see how that actually works in terms of the borough's climate action planning activities.
Thank you, Mike. So, excuse me, James, just before we turn it over to James to go on to tell us more about the connection between the comprehensive plan and the climate action plan, I was remiss in two things. One was I forgot to introduce our Doylestown Borough Mayor, Noni West. Noni, thank you for being here. And I also wanted to ask, how many in the audience are students? Okay, good. Thanks for being here. Do we have any municipal officials in the audience? Okay. And the rest of you, I guess, are residents of one of our municipalities or in the area, right? Okay, did I miss any categories? I'm sorry? Oh, good idea. How many people in the audience are faculty? 1, 2. Alicia in the booth? And, oh, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, sir. Yeah. Dan. Oh, right, Dan. Okay, thanks, Dan. All right, so sorry about that interruption there. So let's go on and turn it over to James, and he's going to tell us about our borough comprehensive plan.
Employing the implementable paradigm that Mr. Rodig just described, borough residents and members of its numerous boards and commissions articulated through their survey responses and workshop participation that the most critical themes the plan must address are: 1, community character and history. Opportunities discussed include the importance of historic preservation as well as the future of the borough's central business district. 2, economic opportunity and diversity. Opportunities focus on how the borough might go about maintaining a diversity of land uses in support of economic opportunities for residents, visitors, and business owners. Parking resources and their impact and value are also discussed therein. 3, housing diversity and attainability. Opportunities focus on increasing housing attainability while managing density concerns and also promoting multi-generational housing and accessory dwelling units. 4, mobility and connections describes opportunities for enhancing community walkability, developing additional pedestrian infrastructure, and enhancing safety for people in transit using media other than cars. 5, a sustainable community describes opportunities to educate the public about practices that work to save energy, reduce carbon emissions, and manage the effects of climate change on daily life. The DCAP is both the cornerstone and encapsulation of this theme. And finally, 6, a center of civic, cultural, and recreational activity includes opportunities to protect and enhance the numerous cultural and artistic institutions in Doylestown Borough, while also planning for future needs of the same. This theme also offers suggestions for redevelopment or reuse of spaces and properties in the borough that have significant redevelopment potential. Next slide, please, Dennis. The DCAP dovetails with the comprehensive plan as it is meant to serve as the guidance document for all sustainability efforts in the same way that the comp plan acts as a guidance document for the higher altitude, longer range, future land use vision of Doylestown Borough. As the DCAP has been formally adopted as an amendment to the comp plan, the DCAP can now carry more weight as both a policy-making tool and implementation guide relative to all sustainability efforts. The DCAP also offers additional value to the community as it serves as a reference for the variety of programs, practices, and tools a resident or business owner could employ in their particular pursuit of a more environmentally sustainable business or household. I'll now hand the presentation over to Grant Alger, Chair of Doylestown Borough's EAC, who will discuss the DCAP's contents and goals in greater detail.
Thank you, James. I'm not used to using these microphones. You all hear me okay? And thank you for everyone for the opportunity to come out, and thanks for you all for coming. We welcome your questions after we're all done here as well. So yeah, I'm going to go over the development of the DCAP and its basic elements. But before I do that, I just want to step back and reflect and remind ourselves, why would you want a climate action plan in the first place? And the simple reason is that climate change is a significant local, national, and global issue. I recommend you all maybe take a look at a 2025 report issued by the prestigious national academies, who they reviewed all the, or at least probably vast number of scientific studies on climate change and its causes and impacts that have been published since 2009. And as stated in the press release for this study, the report they issued says, quote, "The evidence for current and future harm to human health and welfare created by human-caused greenhouse gases is beyond scientific dispute." So that's, kind of a grim sentence, but the hope is that, we can do something about it. And that's what the Climate Action Plan is all about, that local communities, through their actions, can make a difference and help mitigate climate change by reducing their own greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide, please. So yeah, our DCAP was developed after a multi-year process, involved multiple actors and participants and stakeholders, as Dennis reviewed. I would note that the Doylestown Borough government has already been pretty forward-thinking in trying to reduce its own emissions from the government operations. Most recently, last year, they did a big project installing solar panels on our Borough Hall, our town hall. So the DCAP, in a way, could be seen as extending what the borough government is doing. It's also maybe another prod to have the government maybe do more, and also hopefully extends the actions toward reducing emissions to the larger community through information sharing strategies and actions that people can take to make a concrete difference. And certainly Doylestown would not be alone, is not alone in creating a climate action plan. It's hundreds of communities around the country and around the world are doing this, including whole states. The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania itself has its own climate action plan. Next slide. So the origins of the plan go back to 2022 when the EAC, Environmental Advisory Council, first proposed it. Decided to go forward, and happily there was a program that helped us get started, which is the Penn State Local Climate Action Program. Dennis also mentioned that gave us availability to an expertise of a Penn State professor, as well as a very talented undergrad who helped us out in the data crunching and outlining the plan. And then, of course, we also had a Climate Action Plan Steering Committee, which Dennis also mentioned. That include 3 members of our EAC, borough residents, as well as Dennis himself. He didn't thank himself, but you could.
I was the liaison from Borough Council. Next slide.
Next slide, please. So some of the details of creating the plan. Technology was helpful. ClearPath software is a system designed to help manage, estimate, organize, analyze emissions data. So we had access to that and used that. And key value of that is helping to estimate the actual emissions of the borough and what the largest sources are. Kind of what Mike talked about, community involvement. We wanted to also make sure the community had some input in what we were thinking about for the DCAP. So we issued a survey, got 264 respondents, which isn't too bad, just to sort of indicate their views of climate as an issue. How much are people willing to potentially change their own actions and their own lifestyles to address climate? So we wanted to have some of that data. It's notable that the vast majority, 77%, indicated that climate change was indeed an important issue to them. And so the DCAP committee met over a couple of years and had debate and developed various plans and what should be in the plan, and then winnowed that down ultimately to 21 high priority short-term actions that are actually included in the plan. Next, please. So a climate action plan obviously needs to be relevant to the actual community that the plan is for. A community that with lots of plastic factories and whatever, oil refineries is going to have a different plan than a rural township somewhere, right? So we need to have, we needed to understand what the sources of emissions for Doylestown are. I'm just curious if I can ask the audience, do any of you live in Doylestown Borough? And do any of you as students visit Doylestown Borough? Occasionally there are, you know, so, well, most people at least visited, and that sort of indicates what's the primary source of emissions? It's transportation. The borough is a node, a locus of lots of different activities. We've got the courthouse, government, businesses, law firms, and it's a bit of a party town too, I think. It's got bars and restaurants, people come in and out, movie theater, great bookstore, etc. So it's really people traveling in and out of the borough is the main source of emissions. The next big source is commercial energy usage, businesses and such, and then finally residential usage. There are other types of sources, but they don't really register for the borough as a community itself. Next. So, as well as then knowing what your sources of emissions are, the plan should have a goal, something you can move forward to achieve. The DCAP is estimated that if we actually fully act on the action plans in the plan, we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 64% by 2050. I personally, I don't want to fixate on that kind of number or think, you know, well, if we only reach 60% by 2060 was somehow failed or whatnot, because determining and forecasting emissions is really hard. I think a lot of it's somewhat theoretical. It's all very much estimated. So whatever the impact we get from the plan will vary, and it may be even hard to know. One thing I think is certain, and one thing we can know, is that we can reduce emissions, and by taking the actions in the plan, we'll make a difference to reduce emissions and hopefully thereby reduce the worst impacts of climate change. And I would just end my section with a note about climate adaptation. So the report mainly focuses forward-looking about what we can do to reduce emissions, to reduce the impact of climate change in the future. But the plan also recognizes that given the amount of emissions that have already been generated by the human population worldwide, we're already facing impacts of climate, and we may just have those. It might just be how it is. So we need a certain amount of thinking and planning around adaptation to the new climate environment in which we live as well. And that, you know, that can include increased rainfall, more volatile weather patterns, increased warming. We've already seen periods of lower air quality from forest fires and smoke coming over. So there's elements in the plan as well addressing adaptation. So we've got the plan, it's been passed, it's ready for implementation. What happens next? For that, I will turn to another Grant on the stage.
So just before Grant starts, then I wanted to emphasize the point that one of the reasons, not the least of which, was that we wanted to get the DCAP done and make it implementable, like Mike Rodig was talking about, is why we the borough, made the decision to hire a full-time sustainability coordinator, which is Grant Rowe, who's going to speak next. So he's the guy that's going to facilitate getting all this stuff done, right, Grant?
A lot of pressure.
Okay, you're on.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to stand because I tend to fidget around and move when I talk. So, next slide, please.
Okay.
Awesome. So I'll also make a note here and say that the plan does propose emissions reductions by 64%, around 60%. That's a huge undertaking and still a really meaningful reduction of emissions. Often when you read about climate action plans, including the climate action plan for the state of Pennsylvania, you may see higher percentages. We're going to reduce emissions by 70%, 80%, even net zero, but it's often from a much earlier baseline. So for Pennsylvania, for example, their baseline year that they measure all of their actions against is 2005. This is a 60% reduction from 2019. Come 2019, there's been more EVs, more electrification, more renewable energy. So having a reduction of even 60% by 2050 from a much more modern baseline is a huge undertaking and really meaningful in terms of emissions reductions. But to get there, the plan proposes a variety of actions. Specifically, it's a little over 60, but the borough recognizes that that's a lot of actions to have to target and implement. So to narrow that down, as Grant mentioned, we focus in here, we hone in on 21 actions that we call high priority or short term. Those are just actions that should be targeted initially in the 1 to 3 years following the adoption of this plan. I know this is kind of small. We have a QR code at the end that you can scan, and we can jump into that a bit more. But a key thing to notice on this slide is that the actions are largely broken up by the sectors of emissions. So Grant had mentioned transportation's a large one. Buildings, residential, and commercial is a large one. Solid waste is something to also consider. So we break it up by these sectors, and then we propose these actions to reduce emissions. Now, importantly, these emissions will not only reduce greenhouse gas emissions, or these actions won't only reduce emissions, but they also have these other beneficial effects, these other attributes. Those are the symbols you see up here. So some of these, in taking these actions, there's job growth or equity concerns that we can start addressing by also implementing the actions. Also importantly, the actions proposed in this are voluntary. So the borough is really acting as a source of information and education for commercial properties, for homeowners, and for ourselves to act as stewards and start implementing these actions. You jump to the next slide here. So for transportation, for example, a lot of what the borough can do is propose education related to alternative forms of transportation, biking, walking. There's also a push for electrification, both of vehicles. There's a promotion of public transit, and then also an electrification of equipment. And that's where I'd like to highlight, again, how the borough is acting as stewards. We recently purchased and started making a transition to electric lawn equipment. We have some on the screen here. It's also not pictured, but we just purchased an electric zero-turn mower. It's phenomenal. It's so quiet when you're riding it. It's very fun. And that's another way that the borough is trying to show that it's possible, it's feasible, alongside the emissions reductions. Jump to the next slide for me. Grant had mentioned this, but a huge part of the Climate Action Plan also touches on energy efficiency and renewable energy. So for commercial properties, for example, for these buildings, the borough can act as a source of information, again, for that energy efficiency, energy use. Municipal buildings and climate action plans are often considered commercial properties. The borough recently, last year, put a solar array on top of Borough Hall. It's a huge emission savings. It's around 30% annually, and it produces around 180,000 kilowatt hours of energy per year. Awesome. Now for residential properties, it's somewhat similar. Again, it's that energy efficiency component. How is energy being used? Where are those emissions coming from? As well as possibilities for renewable or alternative forms of energy. The photos up here include some of the people in the room. These are photos of some of our EAC members. Often once the Doylestown Borough Farmers Market starts up, we have the EAC tabling there about once a month, and often that tabling corresponds with a theme: energy efficiency, renewable energy. That's one of those themes in a way that the borough is sharing that information out, and again, acting as a steward and beacon of information. Next, we have solid waste. So the plan really proposes both yard waste as well as food waste. Now, food waste is something that can still be explored and looked at, but I did want to highlight some of the actions again and how the borough is proposing and also pushing forward some of these actions themselves. We do have some collection right now for yard waste, including Christmas trees, so they don't have to end up in a landfill or just in your typical trash. They can actually be composted through the borough. I'll mention here that, again, we already had 63 actions for the plan. We narrowed that down to 21 high-priority short-term actions. To start, you can't target everything, so we placed emphasis on areas like transportation, on sectors where there are more emissions. So you can see transportation is the largest. If you get down to water and wastewater, it's less than 1% of the borough's emissions from that 2019 baseline. So to start, there's no high priority or short-term actions in this area. We're focusing on the areas that correspond or have more emissions, more weight in terms of the actual impact that they're having. And then we have climate adaptation. Again, as Grant had mentioned here, it focuses on how do we address climate change that's already going to happen, increased warming, weather events, things of that nature. One great way to do that that's very visible is through trees. So I wanted to end here with some fun photos of the borough planting trees and trying to increase that tree canopy, not only for the sequestration of carbon and emissions, but for the shade aspects, water management aspects that trees provide. Questions?
Okay, so we're going to open it up for questions and/or comments. We have two fellows assisting us here, Steve Nelson and Dave Ziff. If you've got a question or comment, put your hand up and they'll bring you a microphone so we can hear what you have to say.
Hi. Okay, it's working. Last summer, the borough faced a drought. So how does the plan help with that?
Who wants to take that one?
Yeah. So the plan in large part focuses to start on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So drought would obviously be a factor that's being implicated and exacerbated by climate change. That would fall under the adaptation, that last category. So there could be both measures in terms of education, so that could be, smaller side things, rain barrels, things of that nature. The borough, again, connecting, I mentioned it for energy, but it's kind of a theme throughout the whole plan of efficiency. There's also an efficiency not only to energy use, but to water use as well and their water consumption. Energy Star, low flow, certain rated products to reduce the residential water that's actually being consumed. So it is a theme that's kind of highlighted throughout the plan under that adaptation category. That's a great question.
You mentioned something about the solar panels for the, for the school here, but in the township here, what about affordability for like residents to have solar panel? I know it's, for me, something I would do, in a heartbeat, but what can be done for residents that live in Doylestown or any areas that want to save the environment and want to be able to, go green?
Yeah, I think that's a good question that is probably on the minds of a lot of residents. We'd like to do this, but we don't know where to start or how to get going. Who wants to tackle that one? Karen?
I will say the plan itself does not address affordability or funding options for its residents, which is in the borough, not the township, though, just to point that out. There's a difference there. The borough itself, though, does waive permit fees related to solar. It really is very minimal compared to the overall cost. I know there are funding options available, although our plan doesn't list them specifically. Some of you, Grant, you may know some funding options that are out there.
Yeah, and I'll also note from the borough's perspective, I showed the farmers markets up here. We have tried to promote various information, flyers, just to kind of compile that information to make it easier for those who are interested. I think there's also a flyer up here at some point or an image that talks about the borough solar and our own savings. So we can act in some ways as here's what the borough saved in taking on this initiative. It is an expensive upfront cost. It relatively quickly pays for it itself and makes that up. But there's some funding sources, depends on the solar array and where it's going. If it's on a commercial building, there's some incentives through PICO, 10 cents per kilowatt hour the first year as a rebate type of program. It depends on the system size and whether or not what you're interested in. But we are trying to compile information where it makes sense and when we're tabling and doing things like that to share that out.
One of the actions also includes like advocating with state representatives and government officials. So, the policies that Grant and Karen talk about, they come and go sort of from the government, but there have been programs, and as an EAC, we can help, advocate with our local officials, but so can all of you as well. Like, if you have an interest in solar panels and having government programs to help with climate change mitigation, that's not really very helpful in concrete, but at least we can try the long term to try to promote it as well.
Yeah, and, every one of these short-term high priority short-term actions, we spend a lot of time on the committee talking about the need for educating borough residents about these things. And we will strive to do that as the information becomes available that could benefit residents like you directly. Let me ask you, sir, do you live in the township or the borough? Oh, okay. Oh, I see, right. Oh, I see. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I guess we're not quite there yet, but be vigilant because, you know, hopefully things will get to the point where the average resident can afford to get started on this stuff. Did we sort of answer your question at all, or? Okay. Yeah. Thank you for the question. That's a good question. Any other questions?
Yeah, so someone mentioned switching over from, I guess, like gas-powered lawn equipment over to electric equipment. Do you have issues with like recharge times opposed to using gas-powered stuff, or is there any issues with like the batteries while you're working on stuff?
That's a phenomenal question. Yeah, so it depends on the piece of equipment. You know, the borough did a lot of research on different companies, what's on the market, what's available. I think you have to take it and look at the cons as well as the pros. So for most of the equipment, it works very well, and in terms of a use case, it's much quieter, there's less parts, there's less maintenance, you're not having to lug around certain equipment. But depending on what you're using, you sometimes have to lug around additional batteries. So I'll say for things like smaller chainsaws, for things like different handheld pieces of equipment, it's been great. It's much quieter. I mentioned we just got an electric zero-turn mower. That's a whole riding mower. You would think maybe there'd be problems with that. It is capable of mowing most of the borough. It is capable of making it throughout the day, plugging in it at night. Now, it's relatively new, but the feedback I've received is that it's quiet. You can have a headphone in while riding it, something you can't do for other pieces of equipment. But some are a little bit harder to manage. So if you're using a handheld leaf blower, you might have to carry an additional battery, things like that. So sometimes you have to have that additional battery. You have to factor in making sure your batteries are charged. So in some cases, there's additional considerations. But I think the user experience is more beneficial in kind of directing us that way.
All right.
I'm just.
I have a question
I was going to
about how long
piggyback
the-
on that
oh,
really
sorry.
quickly. One area we haven't yet explored is the commercial use. The borough is upgrading all of its equipment to battery powered, and we've got the ability to have a home base to recharge batteries and things like that. One area where we're still waiting to see how things play out is when there's a commercial landscaper where they're going from property to property and don't necessarily have the ability to have that downtime in between. So just, I wanted to piggyback onto what Grant was saying.
Do you know what the lifespan of these batteries would be? Like not like recharge time, but like overall life of the battery?
It's another great question. It depends in part on the company. I think for the most part, and some of these pieces of equipment are somewhat new, so it's kind of a wait and see, but for the most part, I don't think it's the battery itself stopping working, it's just the warranty that's on it. So most of these products come with a 2-year warranty, they're covered. I consider it similar to an electric vehicle in a way where most EVs are coming with an 8 to 10 year or 100,000 mile warranty. Usually, in theory, an electric vehicle battery is not supposed to stop working. It should make it the life of the car. In fact, there are some programs that can reuse old batteries for energy storage and things like that. So it should last the life of the product. It might just become, in certain circumstances, if the battery breaks, there's a warranty. If it's outside of that warranty, that would be a concern. I'll note that these batteries are much cheaper, not saying they're necessarily cheap, but much cheaper than something like an EV battery. So if replacements are needed, it's not as huge of a cost.
All right, thank you.
And I think the other point is that our Public Works Director and Grant and Karen, they do the research on this stuff, and you know, before we put out the money to buy this equipment. So they're very vigilant about getting the good stuff, and you know, it's getting better as time goes by. Other questions?
Hi, thanks for coming to Del Val. So I have a question about the infrastructure, especially in Doylestown. I understand most of the houses are really beautiful and quite old, to put it nicely, but the infrastructure can sometimes issues with like HVAC being out of date and poor insulation, and that can lead to gas house emissions and causing more climate change. I was wondering how you are dealing with the residents with these beautiful homes and trying to convey that they need to maintain them or turn them to better systems instead of relying on the old infrastructure.
Great question.
That's a wonderful question. As far as the residents and how they can adapt some of the older housing stock to be more energy efficient, our Historic and Architectural Review Board, as part of this comprehensive plan actually, is putting together some guidance documents that are historically appropriate aesthetically, that are more energy efficient. And so we're hoping to have a document that gives guidance to our residents. For the most part, though, anything HVAC included that ultimately gets replaced, it's just by default going to be more efficient than what's already there.
Yeah, and if I may ask a second question. Regarding your plants and the trees that you're planting, what kind of species are you aiming towards? Are they native to Pennsylvania, or are you going for more drought-tolerant species?
So the borough's got a list of approved plantings, and selecting the trees that are going to be planted as street trees each year throughout the borough. Our Shade Tree Commission, with Grant as the liaison to that commission, is selecting a select number of trees that the residents can choose from.
Okay, thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you. Sir?
If you address this, I apologize, but
Okay.
one of the things that I was kind of curious was the EV stations. Is there a plan in place to have in the future more within the borough of Doylestown, more of these EV stations? Because you don't, where I live in the Willow Grove area, you don't really see, you see maybe at the giant parking lot, but is that part of the action plan that you have?
Yeah, it touches on the electrification theme that's kind of present throughout. From the borough's perspective, not only are we switching our own equipment, vehicles, zero-turn mowers, handheld equipment electric, but we are promoting the electrification of vehicles. So the borough currently has 4 EV chargers that are available, scattered throughout the borough. We do have plans in place to upgrade some of those chargers, so some of the ones currently there can charge at pretty much the base level of what a level 2 EV charger would be, like 7.2 kilowatts of power coming out. We have some plans to upgrade some of those so they would be putting out double, 15 kilowatts. So we have 4 currently, working on making sure those are up to date, giving the best user experience. But it is in the plan, both from what we're doing and trying to put to the community.
And that's just the borough-owned chargers that Grant's referring to. There are several privately owned but publicly available chargers throughout the borough.
Behind you, Dave.
I have 2 questions. One about the transport that's up right now. I see that you are expanding the DART service. Are you expanding the fleet, or are you changing like what the DART vans are, like electric or natural gas?
So the borough itself does not operate the DART. That's Bucks County Transit. The expansion is the route, but Doylestown Borough doesn't control what vehicles the DART operates. We are planning to work with all of the transportation companies to upgrade their vehicles to electric. If anybody wants to elaborate on that, you can. James, you may even be more aware. of what's going on.
Yeah, I was going to say that both myself and the mayor, we actually are the borough's representatives on the DART committee that has representatives from all the communities in the Central Bucks area that DART serves. And it's on my radar to, in the very near future, introduce the discussion of exactly what you're talking about, because we really haven't discussed that yet, but we need to be moving in that direction, or we think Bucks County Transit needs to be moving in that direction. So we will certainly try to start discussions on that. Great question, thank you.
All right, for my second question, I saw you guys wanted to adapt to wildfires and air quality. How are you going to adapt to that when wildfires, like especially the ones that did it, were not in the state and out of our control?
It's a great question. The borough currently, like you said, we can only really act within the confines of the borough. So what we do is when there is an air quality concern, we act as a booster of that. So we would share that information, share the air quality once it hits a certain level, but really it's acting as a sharer of information of sorts to amplify the reach that, hey, there's an air quality concern, or the state of the air has gone down, that type of thing.
Oh, David has a question.
Yeah, your strict focus on emissions, as it seems like the primary metric. Have you thought about metrics including ambient heat and groundwater? A solution to groundwater is stormwater infiltration.
So those items aren't necessarily directly part of the climate action plan, because the climate action plan is emissions-based. The borough absolutely participates in reducing stormwater runoff and things of that nature. It's just not built into the local climate action plan. We are, in fact, working with the county right now to update the stormwater planning document.
And we probably have time for maybe one more question. Reg? It's appropriate that you would finish up. Absolutely. Please.
Thank you. So, thinking about this, currently, I certainly have to applaud you for the work that you've done within the borough. And I also have to apologize because I believe I referred to it as Doylestown Township rather than...
You said Borough Township, so you were...
I went back and forth?
Close direction.
Okay, so that fits, that I would kind of flop back and forth between...
And a side note, that Doylestown Township, I believe, also has a climate action plan too, where they're working.
And they actually have been here before and done a presentation too.
That's good, that we're coordinating.
So, my question is not, well, I guess it is a question. So transportation is the biggest concern. But pretty much everything that's within your climate action plan is probably on every other community's climate action plan. Would you think that would be viable to say that? And so one of the questions I have is, if transportation is the biggest concern, this is probably the biggest concern for every single community in eastern PA. And so is there any mechanism by the state to take the action plans of individual communities and try to help implement a regional plan that would help to reduce transportation emissions? And maybe are there other kinds of activities that would have an economy of scale if they were done in a broader region than at a particular community level?
Grant, did you want to, or Mike, did you want to talk about from the regional perspective, what, say, DVRPC, how they have helped us to get to this point of doing this?
Yeah, so the regional planning organization is Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission. And they're the local MPO, municipal or metropolitan planning organization. So what they do is they help they basically fund federal funding through to municipalities for local projects and also projects of regional importance. In addition to transportation planning, they do a lot of land use planning. and they have a sustainability department. So one of the things that they are doing right now is bringing together the collar counties to purchase power as a group for, say, county governments and other institutions so that we can purchase clean power and purchase it at a reasonable price. Another initiative that they have going on right now is actually funding solar projects for county governments as well. In terms of your question about coordinating transportation, so certainly DVRPC does a lot of transportation modeling, and they try to figure out like what are some of the trends that we have going on in terms of population, in terms of transportation needs. And then they do try to coordinate those types of efforts with their sustainability efforts and their climate action planning. I would say that the two areas are somewhat separate at this point, just because we have such a long history of transportation planning, and I think we're still kind of figuring out how do we incorporate planning for future climate change into things like transportation planning. I mean, one of the biggest problems that we have is that we are committed to cars. That we've already made that commitment. We made that commitment, 80 years ago, and the borough is somewhat unique in the fact that it is walkable and that you can get to, you can get food, you can get fill other types of daily needs by just walking or biking. Our communities, in order to integrate transportation planning and reduce emissions, have to think about things like density in their community, things like mixed uses in their community. The borough does a fantastic job of recognizing how lucky it is that the mix of uses are intact. People want to live in the community. And they are looking to, in terms of their comprehensive planning, they're looking to augment the walkability, augment the bikeability of the township, or I'm sorry, of the borough. So it's a very complex question that we think about all the time, but I think that it's a very steep hill that we are against in terms of the built environment and how decisions made in the past really do have a large effect on that present environment.
And so, spoken as a true professor, Red, you brought it around full circle to this acting locally, and so we're hoping that by us doing a plan like this, and the township has one, and other communities around Central Bucks and the county have been thinking about or have started working on, eventually if all municipalities, there's 350 municipalities in the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission 5-county region in Pennsylvania, so you were right on target as far as looking at this from a bigger picture, and the transportation element or aspects of emissions is always, to me, I think is probably always, Grant, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is probably always going to come out as the highest part of the emissions for most municipalities.
Yeah, transportation is one of the highest, if not the highest, for the state and for the country. Pennsylvania has their own climate action plan, and then they have various action type plans. Transportation's always one of the areas or sectors that they try to target. They've done transportation specific studies from the state talking about issues with air pollution, traffic, and other really issues and impacts that follow. There are some funding and initiatives that kind of come top down. So there's the national or federal government working with states government for EV chargers, for example. The NEVI program funds EV chargers in certain areas. So there are some funding initiatives available. I don't know yet if we have, through the state or really even through the federal government, a specific action plan to reduce emissions from the transportation sector, but there are some funding type opportunities for more EV chargers.
Does the state encourage, or is it looking at ways of encouraging more mass transit kinds of opportunities. It seems like Transportation Department would certainly be looking at roads and how people move, but are they also really looking at how can we get people to actually use other means of moving from one place to another other than their personal vehicles?
Based on struggles to fund public transit, including SEPTA, I don't know. I don't think that there's a specific necessary plan or emphasis to expand public transit. I certainly think certain agencies within the state are maybe pushing for that, but I don't know off the top of my head if there's a state-specific agenda or goal. It's a great question, though.
Yeah, I agree with that, Grant, but on the other, there's a kind of a two-part question. Planning professors like myself and Dave, we are promoting a concept of transit-oriented development. And actually, coincidentally, just in the last few weeks, SEPTA is actually embracing transit-oriented development, promoting transit-oriented development around their stations on the regional rail line. So people are working on this, but it, you know, like everything else, it's gonna take time. And to Grant's point, I mean, the federal government only 1/5 of the appropriations for transportation funding goes to mass transit. The other 4/5 goes to maintaining roads and building new roads. So that's an uphill battle right there. But at least we're you know, at least mass transit is somewhat holding its own. It's not getting reduced, but it's not enough to do what we really need to do. Good question.
In complete honesty, I'm one of those hypocrites. So I'm talking about mass transit, and I drive to Del Val every day. So.
Well, of course, that's because that's where you chose to live, and, you know, not everybody can live next to a rail line.
That is something at the borough level, we really struggled with that. We've got a train station in town, but we're the end of the line. Do we try to promote that through this planning process, or don't we? We recognize that it's not necessarily the most convenient train stop along that line. So ultimately, we did not put a lot of energy into saying that we should promote the train station because it didn't seem like the best use of our resources. So that was something we really did struggle with throughout the process.
Good question. Well, I know you try to wrap these up after about an hour, so did you have any closing remarks for us then?
The only thing I want to remind everybody of, too, we'll give it back to you, that these are recorded. And so by Friday, the recording of this should be up at delval.edu/onehealth. And so you can reach it there. Also, if anyone is looking for the action plans, the link that was on the flyer does work.
Right.
And you've also got these here. And if you can't get to it that way, contact me, and I'll be happy to send you the link for the documents as well.
Yeah, if I may, just real quick, a comment and a thank you. But first, I live in Doylestown Township, but I grew up in the borough, CB West, Brad. I learned about this climate action plan over the winter, and I reached out to Karen and Grant, and they, with open arms, met with me and some of our landscape architecture students. And that was really, really terrific for us to learn about this. You know, I expect that some of them will be looking into it in their own hometowns. But anyway, I just wanted to say, you know, thank you so much for that, and we hope to keep the connection going.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that, and we have 3 of them right here, right? Thanks for being here. I met these 3 at the Lantern Hill Tour a couple weeks ago, so thanks for being here. And thanks for that comment.
Okay, but thank you all so much.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Yes, thank everybody, and I hope that, although I won't be here for leading One Health, but I hope that perhaps in the future you'll be able to come out again and give us kind of an update on how things are going with implementation.
Yeah, and thanks, Alicia, for manning the electronics up there. Appreciate it. Well, I'll look forward to working with you on the One Health. All right, well, that's it. Thanks.